Welcome to day 28 of Shadowhunters month, and everyone can let out a cheer because this is the final countdown video of Shadowhunters month, and I'm sure you're all delighted with that news because I feel like this whole month has been mostly countdown videos. So I apologise if you're not a fan of those, but there were just so many things I wanted to address. And countdown videos are kind of a really efficient way of doing that. It kind of forces me to be a bit more scripted and logical in that sense, if that makes any sense at all. But yeah, this is the last countdown video, so yay, celebrations all around. And this time, it's a shorter countdown at least. It's 5 characters that I hate that I love. So these are characters in the Shadowhunters verse. I will basically be talking about the books for the most part in this list, but there are a few show characters. But these are characters in the Shadowhunters kind of universe that are kind of my guilty pleasures, and you should hate them, and you should think they're not very nice people, and I do think that, but I love them anyway. And I hate that I love these characters so much, and that's kind of why I thought it would be an interesting idea for a countdown video. So obviously, spoilers for the books mainly, not as much the show, but for some characters there won't be massive spoilers if they've been in the show, but I will be talking about characters that aren't in the show. So if you don't want to get spoiled on them and how, you know, they kind of fit into things, maybe come back and watch this video at another time. And yeah, this is basically a video for the villains. It is an interesting one, I suppose, because there might be some characters that you wouldn't necessarily see as villains, whereas others would on this list. So it's interesting like that. And I will say, Lilith is not on this list. She was close, but I don't really hate that I love her, I just love her, so it's kind of doesn't really work for this list. And Valentine Morgenstern is not on this list either. He'd probably be number 6 if anything, but I like Valentine. I don't love Valentine, so that's kind of why he didn't quite make the cut. But without further ado, these are my top 5 characters I hate that I love. So at number 5 on the list, it's Malcolm Fade. This is a character that is primarily focused on in the Dark Artifices series. He's kind of, at least for the first book, the main antagonist. Well, as we find out in the book later on. We think he's kind of a friend of the main characters at first, then it turns out he's a villain! Isn't that always the way? So yeah, he's a warlock. Magnus Bane knew him back in the day. He was quite a well thought of figure kind of in the community. And he seems to be really helpful with Julian and Emma and all the main kind of gang we focus on in the Dark Artifices. And he's kind of aiding Emma in her search for the people who killed her parents way back in the day, until it's ultimately revealed that Malcolm himself is the one who done it. Plot twist. That was a plot twist for me. I was gobsmacked. And then this kind of whole thing unravels with like a lost love that kind of drove him over the edge and drove him to do some really evil things. And he does some very fucking evil things, let me tell you. And obviously if you've read the books, you know what an arsehole this guy is. But the thing for me, I just found his extravagance and his demeanour really, really intriguing. And the whole idea of how he presented himself and who he was, and how convincingly he was able to kind of get people on his side. Like, even Magnus didn't really know just how evil Malcolm was. after years and years of knowing each other, which is testament to Malcolm's ability, really, of hiding this kind of true self that had been bubbling inside for a while. So I just love how he presented himself. The whole thing that it was a plot twist that he was the villain and the one who murdered Emma's parents was an explosive reveal for me. And the fact that he just had the balls to still be around all these people, even though he'd done some awful things to them without them knowing. Kind of respect it in a weird, twisted way. You know, I respect his balls, basically. I just thought he was a really intriguing character, very mysterious, very twisted, and as I was reading the books, and spoilers, his time came to an end, even though they did kind of bring him back for a bit in the second one, which is interesting. I always felt like I wanted more from him, and I wish we'd learnt a bit more about him. And that's kind of when I realised, oh god, I actually really love this character, even though he's a son of a bitch, and he absolutely is. But I would like to see more of him, and I just love the mystery of him and the way he kind of went about his life. I mean, I don't love that he went around murdering people and murdering the parents of characters I love, but I love the kind of way he not went about it, because it just seems so twisted, like I'm worshipping a serial killer, but he had motivation. That's the thing I think I'm trying to get at, and we learned to understand that motivation as time went on, and it just made him more and more interesting. He's kind of like the Severus Snape of Shadowhunters, if you will. He did it for love, but that doesn't necessarily excuse the horrible things he did. But the fact you can kind of empathise with him, and that the character as a whole was just intriguing, sometimes quite funny, and relatable as well. Is why I loved him, but he's also a bit of a bastard. Number 4 on the list is Jordan Kyle. We've only just kind of been introduced to Jordan on the show, and I really like him on the show. I think the actor Charlie Henson's doing a really, really good job. I'm really liking his dynamic with Simon and Maya. I think he's a really cool character on the show. And I may come to really, really love him by the end of the show's run. But for now, I just quite like him. Whereas in the books, I love Jordan. It's the tragedy behind him, I think. The tragedy of what happened to him, and then therefore how that affected his relationship with Maya, and then him desperately trying to make things right with everyone. How he became a friend to Simon and patched things up with Maya in a way, even though she never could truly forgive him. And he understood that, he took it like a champ, I suppose. And then the tragedy of his death in book 6, when he's killed by Jonathan. He dies in Maya's arms, and she was literally going to break up with him, but he died never knowing that, so it's kind of nice in that way. And then his death kind of haunts Simon for quite a while afterwards, as we see in Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy, as he starts to remember who Jordan was. And they became really, really close friends. So, because Simon's probably my favourite character in Shadowhunters, the fact that he had such a deep connection with Jordan, maybe by osmosis, passed some of that love on to Jordan himself, and that's why I really love him. But I find him a really interesting, complex, tragic character. Such an interesting story. And I love how we kind of have this vision of him in the books originally through Maya telling us about him and about what happened, and then we actually meet him, and at first we don't know who he is. He's just a guy who's kind of moving in with Simon and joining Simon's band, and then we find out, you know, it's Jordan, and the story just goes from there. And it's just, he's such a complex character, but you kind of have to hate what he did to Maya, as much as he tried to make it right. And that's why I really loved the character and found him really endearing, because every waking moment of his life he was thinking about Maya and thinking about what he did and desperately trying to repent for all of his sins. And I think deep down inside he knew he never really could. And I think that's what I find so tragic and so interesting about him as a character. And at the same time, while he didn't have total control over his actions, because it was the first time he turned into a werewolf when he attacked Maya, and therefore turned her into a werewolf, he still did it, and he still has to kind of be held responsible for his actions in that moment, even though he kind of didn't have the grip on reality he would have done normally. So he did a horrible thing to Maya, and he just left her, never... I mean, he checked up on her from behind the scenes, but he never directly faced her again until when we see it in the books. And it's a thing that's held over him for his entire life, and it's something I find really, really interesting and endearing for that character. So, while I don't love what he did, and while I kind of feel guilty for liking him as much as I do because of what he did to Maya, I kind of love him anyway. Number 3 on the list is Axel Morton, who is the kind of, I suppose, main villain of the Infernal Devices trilogy. He is the titular Clockwork Prince from the second book. This is a very similar kind of case to Malcolm Fade. We meet him briefly, he seems like a helpful kind of guy, then he's revealed to be kind of the big bad. And he again has this really complex kind of backstory, and this really complex and layered and deep and emotional motivation for doing all the things he's doing. But the things he's doing are awful and so wrong. And I think it's because I have so much love and such a deep love for Tessa, Will and Jem. That's why I feel so guilty about loving Axel as much as I do, because he did awful things to them. He did awful things to all the main characters in those books, and I loved all those characters. So, he's a bit of a bastard for doing all of that. But because of the complex backstory he was given and the sheer arrogance of the guy, I couldn't help but actually really love him. Maybe I don't so much love him as a character. I love him as a villain, and I love the role he played in the Infernal Devices. And I hate that I love it so much, because he did some really cruel, twisted things to some of my favourite characters in the whole Shadowhunters universe. So that's why Axel Morton is at number 3. Number 2 on the list is the Seelie Queen. This is actually kind of more towards the show than the books. I really liked Seelie Queen in the books. I thought she was a very interesting character. And she's really dodgy, and she's done some awful things, and she does do awful things. But again, the way she carries herself, and the way she just does it with such a blasé way, and such a stylish way, you kind of have to respect her for it. And she can hold her ground against, the most terrifying of demons. And the way she can manipulate situations and manipulate things in such a clever, genius way, you kind of have to love and respect the way she has this grip on everything she touches. And it's rare she doesn't get what she wants, and she always gets out of things. She always just about escapes for any situation. And she's yet to truly really suffer many consequences of the horrible things she's done. And I kind of really love that about her, because I love the villainy she brings to Shadowhunters, and I love the villainous role she has in the story, and I love the kind of villain she is. So I love that about her in the books, and then in the show, she is sassy as fuck. She's sassing everyone she talks to. She also adores Simon, which is a mood. And that scene where Lilith's confronting her, and she's really sassy to Lilith, the Queen of Edom. Holy shit, that's badass. So I really love her style in the show as well, and how funny she can be, and her one-liners just floor me. So again, she does some horrible things. she's a very manipulative person, and she is, you know, outright evil, but you can't help but love her. And number one on the list, probably not much of a surprise, is Jonathan Morgenstern, or Sebastian, if you prefer calling him that. This is, again, kind of a mix of the books and the show. Loved him in the show mainly due to Will Tudor's performance. He's fantastic and really layered and complex in the show. So I really love the role he played in Season 2B and kind of a bit of 3A as well. And I'm very excited to see what he's going to bring to the show with this new actor. Should be very interesting. But I feel like we haven't seen a lot of him properly in the show yet, and the role he was kind of born to play in the Shadowhunters story until 3B airs, so I can't really talk about him in the show too much. But I love what we've seen of him so far, and he's just such a great villain. Again, the tragic backstory, the motivations, he's completely fucked up in the head, and yet you can still relate to him sometimes, even though he's done some really horrible things. And you know, everyone loves a good villain. It's like a pantomime villain. Or at Halloween, you normally dress up as like villains more than the heroes, you know? The villains are just more interesting, and I think that's why we hate that we love them. Because we kind of feel like we should hate them because they do horrible things. But sometimes they're just so good at being evil that hate turns into love. There's a thin line between love and hate, so that's kind of why I think a lot of us are drawn to villains. Like the Joker, for instance, is one of my favourite fictional characters of all time. And I really love Batman too, but the Joker's just so fascinating. And he's sadistic and a murderer and evil, but I absolutely adore him. So that kind of sense as well. That's the way I feel about Jonathan. In terms of the things he does and the way he carries out his business, I just felt like he was a lot more effective than Valentine was as the main villain in Shadowhunters. And again, that really personal connection and that twisted relationship he has with Clary, his sister. So endearing, but very, very interesting and insightful. And it's the same for the books. He is pure evil, does some truly horrific, horrendous things. He has disguises, you know, he has relations with the Seelie Queen. You know, he killed Max. He killed Jordan. He put so many characters through like living hell, quite literally in some cases. He caused so many horrible events to happen to the main characters that we loved in the Mortal Instruments. But at the same time, there's a tragedy to that, because it's only because Valentine was kind of injecting demon blood into Jocelyn when she was pregnant with him that he is the way he was. And we saw in like dream sequences, and when Clary stabs him at the end of book 6 of Mortal Instruments and he's dying, that's when we see the real Jonathan, the Jonathan he should have been, and the tragedy that Jonathan was just not meant to live, and this truly evil version of the man that should have been took his place. The tragedy of that, again, I just eat up that kind of stuff. Such an amazing character, brilliantly written, brilliantly performed on the show so far. He had a really personal story, a really emotional story. And he's just so endearing and such a fascinating and brilliant villain. Probably the best villain in the Shadowverse, for me. Because of all those things, I just love him and love the character. Love what he brings to Shadowhunters. You know, sometimes a thing's only as good as its villain, and you can't get much better than Jonathan. So that's why I love him, even though I also hate him, because he did some horrendous things. And that's why Jonathan had to be number one. Ow! Oh, ow, 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 I just hurt my elbow. Oh, I just hit my elbow on the desk. Oh god, I'm dying. Someone call the ambulance. So those were my top 5 characters I hate that I love in the Shadowhunters verse. Let me know who characters in Shadowhunters that you hate that you love are, or love to hate. You know, give me your lists or just a few characters that you love to hate or hate that you love, etc. I feel like love to hate and hate that you love are two kind of different things, so I shouldn't really put them in the same category. But yeah, I hope you liked my picks and understood where I was coming from with some of them, with my long-winded explanations. But yeah, let me know your kind of favourite baddies, if you will, in the comments. And until tomorrow's video, thanks for watching.